Hi everyone. So I got a new microphone, which I'm really happy about because I'm very well aware of the fact that in a number of my previous videos, the sound quality was pretty bad. And so I just couldn't wait to come on and do a video and just basically put my new microphone to use. It's also an absolutely beautiful June summer day here in Ireland, and that all by itself is a reason to be really happy. I washed my hair this morning and it managed to come out in these absolutely beautiful, perfect ringlets using the Denman brush, which I also recently bought. And if anyone's interested in me doing a video about how to use the Denman brush, and I'm very new at it. But if anyone is interested in how I did this, let me know, and I'd be happy to give a brief demonstration of how I do that. But I'm very happy with how it turned out. And so uh, all those factors basically were just culminated in my wanting to come on and just do a video today. And this is just going to be more of a chatting, informal style video. I'm not going to be reacting to any videos or articles or talking about any specific well-known people in today's video. I just wanted to do a more chatty style video about a topic that's really close to my heart. And I think what I'll share in this video will also provide a lot of context and a lot of background information about my personal experience and why I care so deeply about the topics I make videos about. Specifically about the kind of relationship advice that is perpetuated out there. And also topics such as anxiety and gaining uh, healing and growth and moving on from traumatic experiences, and particularly becoming more trusting and in control of your own thoughts. Something that I'm very interested in is how people get sucked into believing things that are detrimental to their well-being, and how that process happens through destructive relationships and groups that we are sometimes part of. And that's something that I research quite a lot in my spare time. And I think when I describe my own experiences in this video, it will help to shed light on why those topics are so important to me personally. Um, so the focus of today's video is what it means to be an anxious person and how you can minimize the negative impact of living with anxiety, even severe anxiety, on your life through cultivating supportive relationships with other people. Um, and so I want to talk about why, in particular, it's so important for anxious people to have loving, supportive partners. Now that may seem like a pretty self-evident statement. You know, obviously it's not just anxious people who need loving, supportive partners. All of us do. Um, but I want to focus specifically and hone in specifically on what that means for an anxious person and how it can be such a massive healing tool for anxious people in their, in the challenge which anxiety poses to their lives. Um, so I've got my red juice here. I tend to kind of need to take frequent sips when I'm talking like this because it's just, it can be a little bit tiring, I guess. But I think a good place to start is with a little bit of background information about myself. Now, if I were to talk about my childhood, growing up experiences, the traumatic parts anyway, in detail, it would take me 20 videos, maybe more. There was a lot that happened when I was growing up. So I'm going to try and just stick to the highlights or the key points and how they led to me developing pretty severe anxiety. So I had a pretty abusive and traumatic childhood. Um, my parents both had significant issues of their own, which I don't want to go into in too much depth and detail because once I start down that road, it's pretty hard to pull myself back from it. And it's something I've explored, a lot in therapy and in a more private setting in my personal life. So I don't necessarily want to go into a whole lot of detail, but suffice to say that I had a pretty abusive and traumatic childhood. I experienced a lot of neglect. I experienced a lot of emotional and physical abuse. I experienced a lot of upheaval and just instability in my childhood. And that continued into my early adulthood until I moved out of home when I was 21. And it was really only when I got complete distance from my family of origin and started to carve out a life for myself that I started to experience some sort of relief, and that the healing and growth journey that I've been on ever since really started to take off. When you are steeped in an abusive and traumatic environment and you are surrounded by it all day, every day, it's very difficult, not impossible, but very difficult to do any sort of healing, or to even uncover some of the things that are wrong with your own beliefs and ways of thinking. So, on some level, when I was in my early 20s, I realized that I needed to move out and get away and put some sort of distance between myself and my family. As I say, I don't want to get too heavily into the specifics of what I experienced growing up. There may come a time when I do detailed videos about that, but for the purposes of this video, I don't think it's necessary to go into too much detail. But as a result of my traumatic childhood, as a result of the abuse and the neglect that I suffered as a child, I have had anxiety from a pretty young age. I didn't know that that's what it was until well into my adulthood, actually. I wouldn't have been able to put a name to it. And it was only, I think I was in my late 20s when I started to think to myself, I wonder if what I experience sometimes, these symptoms that I experience, I wonder if that's anxiety. And I started to explore the topic of anxiety, and slowly but surely I came to realize that that I was triggered to anxiety by certain factors. And I think severe anxiety is something that is pretty widely misunderstood by people who don't have it. And if you have anxiety, let me know if you back me up on this, or if whether you agree or disagree with me on this point. But I think people who don't have chronic anxiety tend to think of when they hear the word anxiety, they think of um, bouts of stress or being worried or someone who is neurotic. Um, they think of anxiety as like a kind of an almost an endearing but harmless emotion that passes as soon as whatever stressful, as soon as a stressful trigger point passes, the anxiety passes. So this is the kind of thing I have noticed when I tell people that I have anxiety. People who don't themselves struggle with chronic anxiety and don't seem to understand what anxiety really is. Chronic anxiety, I mean, people, when your nervous system is triggered to the extent that you have chronic anxiety, most people don't really understand what that means because it's something you really have to experience in order to properly understand it. We all have anxiety and we all experience anxiety sometimes. I've spoken about this before, but anxiety is a very normal human emotion, and it's the intensity and the degree which it can be problematic. Um, Anxiety is just a fear response. It's an intensification of the emotion of fear. Um, and all of us feel fear sometimes. It's a useful emotion and it gives us clues and information about our environment. And so we don't want to get rid of anxiety altogether. But for those who experience severe or chronic anxiety, it goes far beyond just simply feeling a little bit afraid in a dangerous or risky situation. It goes way beyond simply noticing something that's a little bit threatening. Chronic anxiety actually has physiological symptoms that can feel as if your life or your health is at severe risk. Um, if you've never had a panic attack or a severe anxiety spell, let me paint you a brief picture uh, with words. Um, for me, when I had when I have had an anxiety attack, um, my some of the first physical symptoms that I experience are that my heart rate speeds up, my breathing becomes shallow, my skin feels hot to the touch. I can kind of feel my pulse quickening. Um, my face gets flushed, my head gets foggy, and struggle I can struggle to focus on whatever kind of ordinary task I might be busy with at the time, whether that's work or making dinner or driving, whatever it might be. I really struggle to focus on that task. I'm completely preoccupied with whatever has triggered me. And my brain is hyper focused on the trigger point, whatever that might be. And I really can't relax or focus on anything else until I have resolved that trigger. Now, that is not just a psychological phenomenon that I'm talking about. It's a physiological one too. This is something I'm no expert, but I have done research into this, and I've educated myself on anxiety and what it means. And so I can say honestly, not just based on my own experience, but also based on what I've read, anxiety is a physiological and biological process that happens as well. It's not something that you can switch on and off just with your mind. Your body is responding to the anxiety. And that is, I would say for me anyway, what makes it so challenging. Um, Now, those anxiety spells have been more or less frequent at various times in my life. Um, there was a time, and there have been times in my life during periods of significant emotional stress where I experienced anxiety attacks several times a week. Um, Luckily, the place that I'm in my life at the moment, I rarely, rarely have, if ever, have severe anxiety attacks. I have much milder versions of that. Every now and again, maybe every couple of months, but I don't have panic attacks or severe anxiety attacks pretty much ever these days. And I want to share with you in this video why that is, why I have been able to come so far in my journey with my anxiety, which wasn't my fault. And that's what I also want those of you who do struggle with significant anxiety, that's what I want you to know. Anxiety comes from trauma. Um, and in many, if not most cases, it comes from significant childhood trauma, which of course is not our fault. When you are a child, you are at the mercy of your caregivers, your parents, whoever was responsible for meeting your needs. And somewhere along the lines, children's need for physical, emotional, psychological, spiritual safety were ignored, violated, severely threatened. And that's how anxiety develops. And it embeds itself very deeply in our minds and our bodies as a response when we feel triggered. Because as a child, you are not able to get all of your needs met on your own. The younger the child is, the fewer needs they're able to meet on their own. And children have needs all the way up until they leave home and become responsible for themselves. And so the caregivers and people who are responsible for meeting that child's needs have a huge role to play in the formation of anxiety in a person. And where you experienced a lot of uncertainty around your needs, a lot of danger, a lot of neglect or abuse around getting your needs met, your body would and mind would have interpreted that as a threat to your survival. And because it really was, a child doesn't know that if their needs are not getting met, that they don't have the ability to see into the future to know whether or not they're still going to be okay tomorrow or next week. And so it creates enormous amounts of fear in a child that if they're not dealt with, can carry all the way through into adulthood when things that remind us of those experiences trigger us. And sometimes it can be difficult to see the link between a trigger and those early childhood experiences. We don't always realize that we're being triggered back to feelings we had in childhood. And that's something that a trauma specialist, a therapist, can help you to work through. And so talking about those experiences from your childhood is incredibly useful, because you can start to go back to those very early times when you first felt anxiety. Believe it or not, I didn't even see the link between my anxiety and my childhood experiences until a therapist pointed out to me in a session that I was feeling those symptoms of anxiety, the heart rate increasing, my breathing becoming shallow, my head becoming foggy, my skin becoming hot, those kinds of symptoms that I described. I was experiencing those just simply talking about childhood experiences. Even though they happened a very long time ago, I was reliving the the symptoms of anxiety, just thinking about them and talking about them. And that is what actually got me to see the link between those experiences and my anxiety in the present day. And I ran with that and I just started to explore that more and more, how my anxiety is linked to experiences that I had in childhood. Um, but that's honestly, a whole series of videos all on its own, how anxiety develops. Um, and suffice to say that creating safety for oneself as an adult, once you've left childhood behind and once those traumatic experiences are in the past, and you are now in a situation where you don't have to have those abusive factors that are causing you anxiety in the moment, and yet you can still experience anxiety on an ongoing basis. So the challenge becomes, how do we create enough safety and security for ourselves as adults, so that we're no longer triggered to the same degree as we were in childhood? Um, our minds can kind of replay those experiences and those feelings over and over and over again, almost in like a feedback loop, if we don't take positive steps to let our minds and our bodies know that we're safe and that everything is okay. And for those of you who do experience, any sort of severe or chronic anxiety, you might have also noticed that you are drawn to partners who make you feel unsafe. So in your romantic lives, in your dating experiences, you might have had the experience of having one after another partner who somehow inflames and triggers your anxiety. Um, and this is what it was like for me for many years, to greater and lesser degrees. I had numerous partners over the years, and not all of them, but I would say the majority of them, and far more of them than was kind of statistically likely. I just seem to have I seem to be living in some kind of Groundhog Day nightmare where I was attracting partners over and over again who would cause me unbearable levels of anxiety. And so perhaps you've had this experience as well. And so, as I say, for me, it became this kind of unbearable nightmare that I felt like I couldn't wake up from, where even though I longed for a happy, loving, committed, safe relationship, I just kept finding myself in these relationships with men who were either severely commitment phobic or very emotionally unavailable, jealous, uh, emotionally abusive. Thankfully, I never experienced physical abuse, but a few of the people that I was in relationships with in the past were aggressive to the point that I think they would have definitely become physically abusive had I stayed in those relationships. Um, and I just seemed to be trapped in this nightmare of relationships that would just inflame my anxiety. Things would seem to be going well at the beginning, and before long, I would just find myself to be an anxious, nervous wreck in relationships. And I didn't realize this, but this is actually incredibly common for survivors of childhood trauma and abuse. It's um, it's something that you feel when you're experiencing it, you feel like there's something terribly wrong with you, or that you know that there's a part of the puzzle that you're missing and that there must be something you can do about this. But you feel very isolated and alone. You feel like it's you. Um, and it's because it is you, but it's also incredibly, as I say, very, very common for people who are used to high stress, chaotic, emotionally unsafe environments, or even physically unsafe environments, to be drawn to those sorts of relationships, even as adults, even when they kind of quote unquote should know better. They find themselves staying in these kinds of bad situations and bad relationships. Very common. And that can, even finding that out, learning that it's common for you as an abuse survivor to be drawn to other abusive relationships can kind of create a sense of shame and guilt where you think, well, how am I ever going to escape from what's happened to me? I just keep reliving it, and I seem to be powerless to stop it. And I think that sense of shame can keep you stuck even further, or that is what it was in my case. Oh, excuse me. I had a snack, and some of the crumbs are kind of caught in my throat. So, oh, hopefully that'll do it. Um, but I was really hard on myself, and I felt really powerless. I thought I'm never going to be able to escape my past. Uh, and breaking that cycle didn't happen overnight, but it did start with the realization that shaming myself, blaming myself, being really hard on myself just wasn't productive. It wasn't accomplishing anything. And it was also a misrepresentation of the reality, which is that I was a child who was subjected to experiences that were completely beyond my control and that I never deserved and never should have experienced. And so blaming myself now for the fallout of those experiences and the patterns that I kept reliving as an adult was really counterproductive. It really wasn't getting me anywhere, and it was showing a real kind of lack of empathy for myself. So I really had to walk that thought process back, first of all, and I had to think to myself, okay, if I was shown a lack of love as a child, and if I was shown neglect and abuse as a child, how can I show myself the opposite of that now? How can I show myself understanding, compassion, love, respect, caring, support? How can I really make my needs a priority now that I'm an adult? When I didn't have that as a child, and it's making that complete mindset shift that is what really turns it around. Because if we stay stuck in that, I mean, I hate the term victim mentality, but it is kind of appropriate here. But if we stay stuck in that perpetual victim way of thinking, it's as if we are staying trapped in our abusive and traumatic experiences long after they've passed, and we're not giving ourselves permission to move on and to have better for ourselves. And the cold, hard truth of the matter is that those of us who experienced abuse and trauma in the past and stay in bad relationships do so because it's familiar and comfortable to us on some level. We might not think that that's what's going on. I know certainly in my case, I always told myself it was because I loved the person that I was with. And I'm not going to say that that's not true. That was part of it. Um, I was definitely in love with the people that I was in relationships with, even though those relationships were bad. And so I'm not going to deny that that was going on. But real love is not abusive. Real love doesn't cause you chronic anxiety. Real love doesn't make you feel constantly insecure and unsafe. Real love is not harmful and abusive and uh, it doesn't hurt all the time. Real love is calm and caring and consistent and safe, and it makes you feel good. And that realization also took a while for me to come to. I didn't, you know, put two and two together, that although I thought I loved the people that I was in relationships with, um, the relationships themselves were not actually loving. That is not what love looks like. And I had to it was a very sobering moment when I had to kind of wake up and realize that if I wanted better for myself, I really had to redefine what love looked like to me. I had been shown a template of love as a child that was, someone who was bad-tempered, violent, aggressive, very volatile, emotionally unstable, narcissistic, defensive. That was what love looked like to me as a child. And so I didn't immediately recognize it as abuse when I saw it in partners that I went on to have relationships with. Um, and so coming to that realization was a very sobering moment. And I really pinpoint that as the moment that I realized um, that I was leaving my old life behind. My old life of trauma and abuse was behind me. And it was like I actually started a brand new life. And this was just a couple of years ago, really. So it was fairly recent. Um, but we can actually hang on to those old patterns and ways of um, thinking and believing and feeling. And that anxiety can really embed itself very deeply in our day-to-day functioning. Um, and it can become almost like a security blanket that we're unwilling to let go of because experiencing something truly positive and loving and something that's truly caring and supportive can actually feel a little bit scary because it's unfamiliar. We're kind of afraid of what the unfamiliar will bring with it. Or I can certainly speak from my own experience and say that was what it was like for me. I had so many questions. If I allowed myself to be open to and accept a partner who was safe, loving, caring, supportive, someone who was very calm and even-tempered, someone who never raised their voice or got abusive, someone who was just always respectful towards me, always, you know, loving towards me. I had all these questions because that was so unfamiliar. I sort of thought, okay, well, will that become boring to me? Will it become, will it not be as exciting as the roller coaster relationships I've had in the past? Will I mess it up? Will I be good enough for that person? Um, will that kind of a partner want me? If they're so, you know, perfect in their behavior, am I going to live up to their expectations? what if it doesn't work out and I'm back to square one? I had all these questions, you know, about the prospect of accepting a partner who was just, you know, a good partner, a good guy, you know, and now I'm talking about when I met my fiance, and he was just a great guy right from day one, and he still is. That's just who he is. Um, and I will be quite honest that in the past, if I met a guy who was just really, really good to me, um, I would often feel a bit of skepticism and a little bit of unwillingness about the relationship. It was almost as um, if the person wasn't kind of a little bit hot and cold, I couldn't actually fall for them. I had to actually retrain myself to be attracted to behavior that was really loving and caring, and actually get used to the safety that that sort of relationship provides. But now I want to talk a bit about why it's so important for anxious people to have that sort of relationship. Um, as I spoke about before, when you experience anxiety, you are going back to a time in your life when you felt intense fear. Fear that was so intense that on some level your body and your mind interpreted it as a threat to your survival. That's how intense the fear is. That kind of fear is very deep and very ingrained, and it's not just going to pass simply because we get ourselves out of an abusive environment, or because the actual, you know, abuse is no longer being perpetrated against us. We have to actually send our nervous system and our body and our mind the signal on an ongoing basis that we are safe. And we have to actually work through those and actually sit in those feelings of anxiety as they come up, and yet still know that we are safe. That is actually how anxiety dissipates over time. When an anxiety attack is in its throes, when you are having a panic attack, and I can say this honestly from experience, when you are in the throes of an anxiety attack, you can actually feel as if your life is threatened. There have been times that the physiological symptoms of an anxiety attack were so intense that I really thought I needed to get myself to a hospital. And I've said this to people, you know, to loved ones who were nearby when I was having an anxiety attack, that I actually needed to get to the doctor, because that's what it feels like. Now, it can almost feel like having a stroke or a heart attack. I've never had a stroke or a heart attack, but what I would imagine about a stroke or a heart attack is kind of reminds me of how I feel when I'm having an anxiety attack, which, as I say, thankfully I haven't had in quite a long time, but I used to have them regularly. And yet, you know, so the feeling can be as if your life is actually being threatened. Um, and yet, the actual truth of the matter, if you actually look at the cold hard facts of the situation that you're in, your life is actually not in danger. Although the symptoms of an anxiety attack are extremely unpleasant and they can actually almost make you feel as if your life is in danger, in reality, your life is not in danger. That speeding up of your heart rate, your breathing becoming shallow, your head becoming foggy, those are incredibly unpleasant symptoms, but they won't threaten your life. You will not die from an anxiety attack. And if you know, I'm not a doctor or a medical or mental health professional, but this is what doctors and therapists have told me. It just simply feels as if your survival is at risk, but it's not really. And so that disparity between what the anxious thoughts are telling you, my survival is at risk, and the reality, which is that your survival is actually not at risk, that is the gap. That is the width of the gap that you have to try and bridge in your journey in overcoming anxiety, or in soothing your anxiety and making it less intense over time. So that should give you some idea of what you're up against. And simply getting out of the abusive situation, that's obviously the place to start, but that's not enough on its own. You have to send conscious signals of safety to yourself, so that you can start to accept when you feel anxious that your survival is not actually at risk, that you are safe, you are okay, and everything is going to be okay. And you will probably have your anxious thoughts fighting you every step of the way while that's going on. Your anxiety is there to protect you, believe it or not. As inconvenient and challenging and awful as anxiety can be to feel, it's actually a very intense protective mechanism that cares deeply about your safety and your survival and your well-being. And it is doing its best to protect you because it comes from a time when you really were at risk. And it's still sending those signals to you. You have to be really careful. Your survival is at risk. This is really serious. This is really dangerous. It's still sending you those signals. Your anxious thoughts are telling you these things, even though that's not actually true. And so the reason that a loving and caring and supportive partner is so important is because they can actually be that pillar of strength that you can lean on during those times when your anxious thoughts are at war with the reality, when your anxious thoughts are telling you that you are under threat when you're not. And a truly loving, caring, supportive partner can be your reality check and can be the person who will not get triggered by your behavior and say, everything's okay. It's going to be okay. And it really will be okay. With a loving and supportive partner, they will have the emotional strength and the character and integrity in that relationship, and the commitment to you to be there for you throughout your journey with anxiety. And it really will be okay when you're with the right partner. When you're with the wrong partner, they will make you feel unsafe during a period of anxiety, because most likely your anxiety will trigger them and their issues. So a bad partner for you is someone who intensifies your feelings of unsafety when you are feeling anxious. And that is so destructive because they are not contributing to the feeling that everything is going to be okay. A bad partner for you will make sure that things really aren't okay when you're having an anxious spell, when you're feeling anxiety. A person who is bad for you, a person who is not the right partner for you, is not going to help you to feel safe because they don't know how to create safety for you. Either they're an abusive, emotionally unavailable person, or their issues are just simply clashing with your issues at that time. They might be triggered as well. And so they're not able to provide that strength and stability that will carry you through an anxious spell. And so just to talk about this in the context of my life, if I can for a moment, just describe the kind of guy that my fiance is. Um, he is a very happy-go-lucky, easygoing person who doesn't really get triggered by much. He's very even-tempered. He never loses his temper. I mean, he's certainly can express irritation and anger, but it's always in the moment and then it passes very quickly. And he's just a really, really good person. He's kind. Um, he's respectful of everybody. He treats me like gold. He's really loving and affectionate, and most of all, he's just incredibly consistent and calm. And he's he's very empathetic as well. So he's able to sit with me, even if he doesn't fully understand what I'm going through when I feel anxious. He's able to sit with me in that moment and be there with me and try to understand. And he is at least able to tell me that everything's going to be okay. Because he knows everything is going to be okay. He has that, you know, worldview that lets him know that everything is going to be okay. Whereas I might not necessarily have that. I'm certainly developing it more and more as I go along, as my anxiety heals more and more. So I am starting to develop that broad overview that everything is actually okay and everything is actually going to be okay. And I don't have to give in to every anxious thought that I have. But I had to borrow that from him. I've had to borrow that from him at various times because my anxious thoughts didn't really allow me to know that. Um, and so, in brief, in summary, that is why having a loving, supportive, calm, and consistent partner uh, is so beneficial for people who struggle with anxiety. You have to understand that your anxious mind is not always able to let you know that you are safe and that things are okay. Its job is to protect you from danger, so it is always trying to find the danger. And if necessary, it'll even intensify the perception of that danger in order to try and keep you safe. Um, and so you can't really rely on your anxious mind to let you know when things actually are okay. So your anxiety is not really able to help you to feel safe. Your anxiety comes from a part of you which is much younger, and it actually needs to be reassured. It's not able to reassure you. It's like asking a scared, crying child to tell you that everything's going to be okay. They can't. They're the ones that actually need to be reassured. And so you have to somehow access the adult part of yourself that's able to let your anxiety know that everything is going to be okay. But that can be very difficult to do all on your own. Um, as human beings, we need other people, we need our relationships, and we need to lean on the people in our lives sometimes. And I think never is this more true than when you are an anxious person who's had trauma in your background. You sometimes do need to be able to lean on the people in your life to help you to know that everything is going to be okay. And over time, that belief that everything is going to be okay can become yours. And over time, that anxious part of you that's still very young can actually start to grow up and can start to, get that perspective that just because I feel anxious, it doesn't mean that the world really is ending. Just because I feel triggered, it doesn't mean that this thing that's happened is a serious threat to me or my life. It can feel that way, but we can start to pull ourselves out of that anxious state. And that is, believe me when I say that I know what a Herculean task that is. It's huge, and I don't want to downplay I don't want you to underestimate what a big task that is to try and help your anxiety to start to grow up and feel safe again. And that's why I just really want to encourage you to seek support in the form of loving relationships, because that will just give you a massive, massive boost and make it so much easier for you to cultivate that sense of safety within yourself. Not to mention that at times when you can't access safety for yourself, um, the loving, supportive people in your life will carry you, um, and you know, so that things really will be okay. You won't, nothing catastrophic will happen, hopefully, if you have people looking out for you. So it's so important. And I know that it can be difficult to create all these healthy, loving relationships. It's not as if those people are just a dime a dozen. You really have to go and seek them out. Even if you just have one or two people in your life that you can really count on, and that you feel that you really truly can trust, and who really have your best interests at heart, who really, really care about you, who are loyal to you. It's so worth it to seek those people out and to have a couple of those people in your life. Um, so I want to leave you with that message, and I'll be back with another video really soon, now that I have my new mic. And as soon as I feel sufficiently inspired about what my next video topic is going to be, but I really hope that this video was helpful to you. I personally have applied to start my counseling degree when the semester starts in September. So I should actually be starting studying this year, and I'm very excited about that. And one day, hopefully, I will be a qualified and licensed therapist, and I can give this sort of advice to people in a more focused way. But until then, I hope that just my sharing my experiences and my insights that I've gained from what I've been through, I hope that's helpful to some of you at least. So have a great weekend until next time.